So welcome everybody to the LGBTQIA plus romance panel. Just gonna have everybody introduce yourselves really quick and then we're gonna jump right into questions. If you have questions and you're in the room with us right now, there is a microphone in the center aisle. And then the moderators will be asking questions that come from the Facebook group. So I'll go ahead and, so I'm Quinn Ward and I can hold it closer. Thank you for letting me know. So I'm Quinn Ward, and I write romance, and my first book came out in 2013.
I'm Nora Phoenix. I also write romance, and I've been published since October 2017. Fun little detail, Quinn actually made the cover of my very first book, so we go way back.
Can you hear me clearly? Okay, great, thank you. I'm Jackie North. I've been writing since I in fourth grade, and then I went to fan fiction, and then I started writing romance, thinking I was doing something quite unique, that I was the only author in the state of Colorado doing this, the only person in the world who had thought of it, frankly. And then I discovered, oh my gosh, there's a whole community out here, which I thought was wonderful. First book was a time travel romance back to World War I, and I loved writing it, and I have 10 very solid, passionate readers, which I appreciate each and every one.
Hi, I'm Lise Gold. I write FF romance, and I also write FF erotica under the name Madeline Taylor.
All right, so we're going to jump into questions, and the less you want to hear me talk, the more questions you have to ask. So somebody go up and ask a question. So the first question, and I'm going to say whoever wants to take this one can jump in. How do you approach writing LGBTQ characters in a way that's both authentic and avoids stereotypes?
I basically write people, and then they have different sexual needs than possibly I do, so I talk to someone who has those, or read books, but everybody's a person, then you just start with that.
For me, I am a lesbian, so I write
That makes it easier.
from that much easier. I write from personal experience, people I know. I basically just draw on the world around me.
All right, and then what are some ways to sensitively tackle issues like homophobia, transphobia, and bi-erasure when you're writing romance?
So bi-erasure is a big one for me because I'm bi or pan, whichever label you prefer, myself. It's annoying as fuck, it really is. I'm just gonna be honest about that. So it's something that pops up a lot in my books, is that discussion, is the automatic assumption of binary, being either straight or gay, where there's a whole lot of varieties and colors and 50 shades of gray. See how I shoved that one in? That was very subtle. So yeah, it comes up a lot in my books. Homophobia, personally, not so much, and I think that's mainly because it's such a hard topic for people to deal with. I think it's one of those things that we encounter a lot in real life, but don't necessarily want to encounter in a romance, because romance is supposed to make you feel good. And where I do try to incorporate real life issues in that, this is one that just is very close to home for a lot of readers and is very hard to deal with in a way that doesn't dominate the whole book and just makes them feel crappy and remind them too much of real life. So it's not one that pops up a lot. Sometimes in terms of parents not accepting their kids, that's something that I do, because that's unfortunately a reality that we deal with in real life.
I write gay cowboys, and they all work on a guest ranch together, and somehow they're all gay, which is not realistic, but it creates a universe in which homophobia doesn't show up, which makes it a romantic environment. Now, I might have somebody who came from a background where their parents didn't like them or the town shunned them or something, but that's their wound that they're carrying, and then they come to the ranch and the magic happens. I use the word magic a lot in my stories. It is a romance. It's not real life. And everybody falls in love, and everybody's happy and kind, and the person who is mean gets, evicted, because I don't want that kind of person in my... So it's all made up. It's not realistic, but it's a fun place to go.
I do try and keep it realistic, but I want to put the emphasis on the positive side, also because it's romance, and I just want my books to be like maybe hopeful for people who are in a situation that's not as ideal. So although there is some homophobia in there in my books, and also instances of parents or family not accepting the relationships, there is always some kind of resolution, or at least like personal acceptance at the end.
All right, and I love that, the acceptance at the end, even if it's not there at the beginning in the middle, like making sure that we come around.
Even if it's just that the characters accept that their family won't accept it.
Right, because unfortunately, you know, that is real life, and so I do think that sometimes it's good to show that as well, that you can still be happy and fulfilled, and even if that means like, you're toxic to me, you're gone, you know? All right, let's see. You know, you guys, the microphone, center aisle. I don't have the live feed up. Ooh, I love it. Is it considered cultural appropriation if someone who is not a member of the LGBT community writes characters in their story?
No, I don't think it is. But I don't accept the premise of the question, because the premise of the question assumes that none of us are members of the LGBTQIA plus community. I don't think people owe anyone a disclosure about who they are when they write. I don't think we should ask people to come out as anything. And the question to me is one that is very selectively asked. I always use Nicholas Sparks as an example, not because I know him, because I don't, but he writes women's fiction. Nobody ever asks Nicholas Sparks why he feels, as a man, qualified to write about women. Nobody ever asks him that. But we, as authors, get that question all the time. Why do we feel like we are allowed to write these stories? I think it's the wrong question. I think there's absolutely something important about sensitivity. I think there's a hard line between writing a romance and appropriating a group, or even fetishizing a group. And as long as you stay on the right line of that, I don't think you owe anybody an explanation about who you are. And the assumption, because that's what's behind it, I'll get off my soapbox in about 30 seconds.
I know better than to try to interrupt me. Okay, you'll knock me over.
The assumption that is behind it is usually worded as, why do straight women feel like they can write gay romance? Well, I'm not straight. And I know a lot of us aren't straight, even if we are straight presenting or in a straight relationship. So I understand the question, but again, I reject the premise of the question.
Well, and I think, so Lisa, I really, because you have kind of a different viewpoint where you're writing in Sapphic. But, you know, to that point, it's also not everybody who looks like a female identifies as a female either. And that's another really, really important thing to understand. And so you can't, and with Sapphic, I know trans women who are writing Sapphic, and many of them don't, and again, not a great term, but don't quote unquote pass. They don't have to. They don't owe anybody that, you know? So Lise, what do you see in Sapphic? Do you see the same sort of thing?
I think that's mainly written by women, but it is fiction. I think as authors, we put ourselves in our characters' shoes. So if people can write about a serial killer without being one, then why shouldn't they be able to?
Because they really, really want to be a serial killer sometimes, okay? It's better to kill the fictional character than, you know? All right, we have a question at the center aisle. Oh,
Hi.
Jeff,
Hi.
did you have something to add
sorry.
real quick?
I only wanted to say that, you know, we've talked about the fact that 85% of romance is written and read by women, but that doesn't make it exclusive to that. Everybody is welcome to come in. I could write about vampires. I could write about Native American peoples. Am I being empathic? Am I trying to tell their story? I don't presume to give them a voice because I'm not an expert, but you know, there's something about that culture that resonates with me, and it would resonate with readers too, because you never know who's going to hear your story. So I don't think anybody should be drawing any lines about what you can and cannot tell the story of. So that's my very strong stance on that one.
All right. Jackie had a very strong opinion, and she might have come and tackled me. So now that I'm safe, please ask your question.
Sure. Hi. I have 2 questions. I hope that's okay.
That's fine. We interrupted you, so now you get a bonus.
First of all, sometimes I struggle if I'm talking about a transgender character, and I want the audience to know they're transgender, not because I think a transgender woman is not a woman, because I think a transgender woman is a woman. But I think that's essential detail to the story. But I don't want to dead name them, and I haven't found a good device to do that in kind of a, I think, subtle and appropriate way. And so I'm curious if any of you have encountered that challenge.
Just a little bit.
Yay.
So both I have written a trans character, but also being trans, it's a big thing for me because that representation matters. And so it is a very sensitive topic. But the characterization, think about things like the struggles that they go through. Are they somebody who kind of embraces that they had this former life? Because we can show that, and we can show that transformation. In my case, it was the acceptance, because it's going to come up in a romance, most likely, that things are not necessarily what they appear while fully clothed, right? Unless you're writing closed-door, sweet romance, in which case you have to be a little bit creative about it. But these are discussions that have to be had in a relationship unless the other character knows ahead of time, which a lot of times is not the case. And so just think about the conversations, the interactions. How does this person feel about their previous life, about their existence before? How do their friends embrace them? How do they approach entering into this relationship?
Beautiful.
And saying, you know, and a lot of times in a trans romance, especially if the other character is cisgender, a big theme in that becomes, I love you. Mm-hmm. It's not your parts that I love, it's you, and I embrace you, and I accept you.
It's the wine and not the label, according to Schitt's Creek.
Yes, it is. I also think that a very subtle way of introducing it, but that depends on your character, if they are not cisgender passing, is by having somebody ask for their pronouns. Because that's a very subtle way in which you can indicate that somebody might be non-binary or trans without saying, or you know, it's showing, it's not saying.
Beautiful.
So
Thanks. Oh, sorry.
I've only written one trans character, a trans woman, in my books. And I was really scared of getting that wrong. So I did talk to people about that, to trans women. And these 3 people all felt like I should introduce it into the story earlier on, because the trans woman got together with a man. And yeah, that's what I did.
At that point, if it's early in the story, again, that's characterization. Because if you think about it, any trans person who winds up dating somebody, this is not something that happens at the 60% mark in our relationship. This is something that has to happen, not necessarily at the meet cute, but definitely before the 50% mark.
That's great. Thank you. Beautiful answers. Other question, 180 degrees. Money. Do you think that the opportunity of the market for queer romance is large enough to make like significant money? I'll leave it at that. Please be as specific as possible.
yes, it is. If you were here on the first day, you would have seen I was on the high-powered author panel. There's a certain income that you have to make to be asked for that panel, let me put it that way. I write full-time. I have been writing full-time since 2017. I am a single mom, and I fully support myself and my son with my income. I will be able to pay for his college. I pay for a hell of a lot of travel because that's what I love most other than my son. I've bought my own house, so that should give you an indication of the earning potential. And I know there's a lot of authors who make a full-time living writing queer romance in its widest form. But, however, the competition has gotten severe. If you enter the market now, you're going to have a much harder time carving out that same audience than I had back in 2017. It is not easy. The competition is high. The market is, I'm not saying saturated, but it's definitely it's soggy. It's a soggy market. I like that. It's a soggy market. So that I absolutely want to make that caveat.
I want to add something. And Nora is a high tier earner, very hard worker. For someone like me, making much less, I don't have a son. I'm not paying for college. I can make a living wage, but it's at a different tier. If that makes sense to you. So there's different tiers. I think there's plenty of room for everyone. Write your story. Write what you love, and that's the bottom line.
Lisa, I'm curious about your experience on the sapphic side, because I know that for a long time, the side was much more popular than the sapphic side. So how are you seeing, first of all, are there sapphic authors making full-time livings? Are you one of them? But also, do we see the market share growing over on that side?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know a lot of authors who make a full-time living. Well, I think all of you guys here front row, myself as well. I had a really good job before I started writing full-time, and my income is much higher now. I agree that it's slightly more difficult to penetrate the market now, but considering, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't work really hard.
That's okay. That's okay.
I write when I feel like it,
See,
and
but
I don't put
but I
a
think
lot of
that's
effort
important.
into the rest.
I think it's important to go ahead and say that, though, because there's this assumption that the successful authors are sitting at their computer from sunup to sundown, right? Now, just because it's one thing to listen to the people who are up here, I would love a little audience participation if people are comfortable. How many people out in the audience are making their primary living off their writing? It's a lot of hands that went up, because it is definitely, it may not be easy, but it is possible.
So as writers, we care about words, and presumably also care about the words used to describe us and our writing. So gay romance versus romance, please comment.
I think there's an ongoing debate. I came from Kirk Spock and Starsky and Hutch, and to me, having two men fall in love with each other was the most natural thing in the world, and I learned quickly not to bring it up. And then I called it slash, because it was K/S or S/H, and then the young kids came along and they had morph words like John Locke for Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. So things change, and meanings change, and definitions shift depending. Right now, a gay man will come into the community, 85% women, and say, why are you writing my story? And then there'll be the discussion as to whether gay romance is the same, like you've asked. And to me, romance is our fantasy world about what gay life is. And then gay fiction is a more realistic picture where there's issues of homophobia and voting rights and, all these kinds of things. But that may change. So right now, I write I don't write gay romance because I'm not a gay man, and that's not my story. And I want to tell something more magic and fantasy based. So everybody else may have a different answer, and that's the answer. It's different for everyone. And there is a general consensus, but it's shifting always.
Yeah, I agree. It's different for everyone. I think FF romance is mainly read by female audience, I think, more than so they may not necessarily feel like you're trying to write their story and can't step into their shoes.
So we also run into the issue of Amazon categories. What we call ourselves isn't necessarily what Amazon labels us. Amazon's category is called gay romance. That's a much broader term than MM romance. So that's also something to be aware of. MM, by definition, is male-male. It can also be MMM or MMMM. I mean, you can throw in all the M's.
You've done that before.
I've done that before. I've been known to throw quite a few M's together. I like that.
It's too many body parts for me, all those.
Yeah, I
M's.
don't struggle with those. I use Barbie dolls. Male ones. Kens. Sorry. Kens. I do think it's important to use the correct term. The problem is in marketing, we can't always use the correct term because we also have to use the term that readers use to search or look for us or how they label us. So that's always a bit of a tightrope to walk between how I would like to call it and would like to label it and what readers call it. Because the reality is that the majority of our readers calls it gay romance and not MM romance. And that's just, you can tell by the popularity of the search terms. So I will label it as gay romance, even though in my case, MM romance would be, for me, the correct term.
Well, Lisa, I want to ask you about this because I actually had to ask a friend, and so it's something that other people may kind of question as well. What is the commonly used phrases and terms for categorizing lesbian fiction?
On Amazon, it's lesbian. That's what it's called. And then sometimes we are put into the category of LGBT plus.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's not necessarily how we communicate. I think nowadays the word sapphic is used more. I know that, kids use the word queer. It depends on, I think it depends quite a lot on age as well.
Right, right. Well, and I think, the other thing is when you talk MM versus gay, you have male versus, to some people, gay, especially now, is it a gay romance if it is a bisexual romance? And that's a big distinction when you're looking at the reader front, what I'm saying to my readers in my newsletter, in my social media, everything else, versus Amazon. Because I don't know about anybody else's experience, but I know that for me, bisexual romance seems to be very much the Menage books where it's two men and a woman or two women and a man. Duck, good. This is why my editor has job security, okay? But, right, they're hard. They're hard. But the thing is there are going to be times when we use language that is different than what we use in our metadata, in the backside, everything else.
There's also the issue that for some readers, if you write a romance between a non-binary character and a male character, it is not male-male romance. Because non-binary, technically, is not male. So that would qualify as a gay romance, but not as an MM romance. And that's a distinction I personally make myself. Out of respect for somebody's identity. If you are transgender, if you are non-binary, I do not want to give you the wrong label, even in fiction. So to me, a romance between two non-binaries or that's not MM, that qualifies as gay romance. That needs the broader umbrella.
Okay, so you're back to having to listen to me ask the questions because nobody's at the microphone. If you can just head over to the microphone. See, she's like, nope, we don't want Quinn asking questions. I will save everybody in the room.
How much market research do you do? How do you do your market research, and how do you respond to what you learn?
I do a lot of market research. I'm also a type A personality, in case you missed that. I'm super organized, structured, on top of things. And let me put it this way, Quinn and I are opposites, which is one of the reasons why we love each other dearly, because they have chaos following everywhere they go, whereas everything needs to be nicely in order and structured for me. And yet we're... So I do a lot of market research. Part of that is simply checking the main categories for me, gay romance, bisexual romance, on Amazon every single freaking day. Every day. I check them every day. I want to know the top 10. I want to know the shakers and the movers. I want to know why a book is doing particularly well. I want to know which books are really sticky and why, and I will read them. I might hate every freaking page, but I will read them because I want to know what is it about these books that is resonating with readers. Why are they so sticky? I also want to know which books aren't doing as well as I would have expected. Sometimes you see a release from a well-known author and it's not doing as well, so I will read that book too. And in some cases, I will reach out, if I know them, I will reach out to the author and just check in, like, hey, do we know what's going on? I was expecting this book to do better, because you can learn from that. Sometimes it's a case of a cover that doesn't appeal. Sometimes it's a blurb that doesn't quite pitch the book well enough. Sometimes it's something outside of their control. We've had authors who launched and then Amazon had a glitch and they disappeared off the charts for 3 days, tanked their rank, and then came back. Well, that's a lost battle. So I keep an eye on that. I'm also partially wide now, so I try to look at other retailers, which makes it an even bigger job. I really try to keep an eye on the market and see what is going on and what is popular. So for me, that's a huge part of what I do.
I do a lot of research because I love research, but I don't do as much market research as I should. I do a lot of research, write the book, and then I hope that if I'm happy with it, that my readers will be happy with it too. But once the book doesn't do well, then I want to know why, and I start digging into it.
Sue, go ahead. You're or Victoria. I'm tired. I'm tired. You can hit me later.
Okay, I'll talk about this country because this is where we are. I'll talk about this country. Given the political climate at the moment here in the US, and going back to what you said about it being fiction and fantasy, do you ever feel as an author, because of the subject that you are writing, that your characters belong in, that the world that they belong in, do you feel a responsibility to include that in your stories, or can you totally divorce yourself from that when you're writing?
Well, for example, the recent troubles of 3 years sitting in your house collecting dust. I'm not going to tell that story. I just lived it. I have no desire to visit it. When I write a gay cowboy or a sexual awakening story, I feel like I am being an ally by making the story out, putting the story out there. So it's not so much about politics, it's about speaking for a voice. Maybe it's my voice, I don't know. But I don't want to bring politics into it, Victoria Sue, because I think I would have a lot of swear words and I'd be throwing things and it would make me unhappy. And, there would be a time and a place, and maybe I will. But right now I want to make it gentle and sweet. I am, what am I, a Little House on the Prairie meets Brokeback Mountain. And there's no politics in there. There's chores.
But with happy ending.
With happy endings, HEA. There's chores, there's falling in love, there's hay and buckets, and there is no room, and there might even be churning butter. I haven't done that yet. There's no room for politics for me. Not right now. It's a good question, though. Thank you, Victoria.
I don't include COVID in my book because it sucked bad enough in real life. I don't need to relive it. I also don't include real life politics, not in my books. My books are, as far as I'm concerned, a safe space for readers. I have written a whole series set in the White House with a fictional bisexual president. That was very fulfilling to write, very fulfilling, because it's kind of like how you want it to be. That being said, I am unapologetically 100% incredibly political on my Twitter as an author. And I know that for a lot of authors, the advice is, don't get involved in politics, don't divide. I don't care. I just don't care. To me personally, it is too important not to speak up. And that's because I feel I'm not just a romance author. I also represent a genre, and I represent, as a queer person myself, a group of people whose rights are being threatened. So that is something I cannot stay silent about. So in my books, no. On Twitter, hell yeah.
I don't touch politics at all in my book. I'm really terrified of even going there. But I did include the pandemic, sort of the aftermath in my latest series, because it was set in Benidorm in a really trashy hotel. Just when things started opening up again and people were really excited to go somewhere, and I really couldn't ignore that. So I actually included that in 3 books. But apart from that, I try to make it as timeless as I can, so people still want to read it in like 20 years' time.
Well, and I think that that's a really important point. As soon as you include politics or any current events that are going on, you have date stamped that book. You know, I mean, think about if you read something that includes the house phone, a CD player, a Walkman, that dates it.
I have a book where Tom Brady is quarterback. I'm just saying.
I wonder why. Just saying. All right, go ahead.
Hi, this is a question for Lisa, specifically about lesbian fiction. What trends are you noticing in lesbian fiction right now?
That's a
I
good
thought that would be
question.
a less charged question.
So that's really hard to answer, but what I have noticed is that there was a huge trend for erotica going on, and that seems to be going down a little bit, and it seems to be a little bit more wholesome, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word, but and I mainly noticed that by like the book covers and the amount of erotica that is coming out. I feel like it's becoming a bit more bit less saucy, maybe. Yeah. But I might be wrong. I don't know if anyone else has seen any.
I think I'm also seeing more fantasy, sapphic romances coming out,
Yeah, you're right.
which I love.
yeah.
I love to read them, but and a lot of YA lesbian romance, which is fantastic.
I have a couple of more questions, but the easy one is, how many releases do you do per year?
Do you want to start, Lisa? And we'll just go down the line.
I do 4 releases per year. Well, 3 to 4. Anything on top of that is a bonus, but
Well, my goal last year was 6, but I didn't make it because somebody died. And I went into this deep funk, and I could not imagine that I would ever come out of it, which I'm starting to. My goal next year is 4 to 6 if I can do it. But you have to like plan ahead. You have to have those books and the charts and make a plan and stick to the plan, and that's my goal.
I think I'm at 8 this year, might be 7 or 8, and that's kind of my sweet spot. I used to do 12 a year, and then I decided that I also needed a life, which, you know, I know. So 6 to 8, but I try to stay around that, and that's just full novels. Like I usually throw in a couple of short stories, bonuses, whatever, but that's the main.
wow.
And then for me, it's whenever the Chaos Gremlin allows me to release a book anymore. I've got a lot of other things going on, and so while I still have a full-time writing income, that is no longer the priority there. So I think this year it might wind up being 2, but my first book this year was the first book in 14 months. Yeah, that wasn't fun. Don't do it.
Okay, Nora glanced at this. Can you comment on your intentionality or responsibility or satisfaction with writing the world that we wish to live in?
I think that's why we write romance. To me, the definition of romance, or I should say, romance by definition is an escape. So while I do want to incorporate some realistic aspects, my goal is to offer readers that escape, and that means I write the world that I would want to live in. Also because it makes me happy. I don't yuck anybody else's yum, I really don't. And if you like to read literary fiction, good on you. I can't because it depresses the fuck out of me. They die, they're depressed, it's gloomy, I can't. If I finish a book, I want to be happy. Somebody recommended to me, I don't even know how to pronounce it, The Banshees of Inversion or something, the movie. Anybody saw it? Anybody saw it? Okay. I don't know why on earth anybody would want to watch that movie. Because by the end of the movie, I legit wanted to jump off a cliff, and it was so depressing. I read romance, I write romance because I want to live in that fantasy world. I really, really do. So for me, the world that I create is the world as I would love it to be. It really is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an escape.
Even the dragons?
Yes,
Rock on.
especially the dragons.
All right, Lisa.
I want my books to be hopeful and escapism, as you said, but I do include a lot of realism in them, and I do find it important to like write about things such as addiction or depression, or because readers can identify with that, and some things just to make the topic a bit more approachable, to weave it into a romance, so it's easy to touch upon, if you will, because it's not so heavy, and just show how they get through that struggle, or they may not even get through it, but they get out at the end in a better space.
Are there any on Facebook? Okay. All right.
So as you said, the MM market is
Move
very
closer.
soggy. Very soggy. So we have two of you up here I know are experts in the field. I mean, Nora, I lean on you so often, and I look at your statistics that you put out, and Quinn, you've been my mentor for Amazon. You're like the Amazon hero. So I think, as an MM author, and I see a lot of people here too that are looking for this, talk to us about trends. Talk to us about what, do we need to do standalones? Do we need to do box sets? We've heard a lot of stuff at the conference, but definitely give us a little bit of guidance while we have you guys, your expertise here on the panel.
Series are still hugely popular with readers. I do think they tend to gravitate more towards shorter series. Commitment seems to be kind of a dirty word. So if you have a 20-book series, it's going to be really hard for readers to start that, because it feels like this huge commitment. So I'm seeing a lot of success with series that are 4 or 5 books and then stop. I also know that on one hand, it's really fun for readers to see cameos from your characters. By the way, Sean Montgomery, who's sitting right in front of me, is the absolute queen of cameos. If you want to learn how to do that, talk to her, because she excels at that. Her characters always pop up. But you don't need to read their books to understand it, and that's something else I would recommend. Do not interconnect all your books, because if you have a reader like me who is slightly OCD about reading stuff in the right order, I'm not going to read it because I can't figure out the order. So be careful with that. That being said, I also recommend doing at least a few standalones, because they're easier for readers to get into your back catalog, to get started with you, just to see if your writing style appeals. I have a few standalones that if readers are new to me, I always say, read Coming Out on Top. That's a classic Nora book. It has all the stuff that I'm known for, but it's a standalone. It's not connected to anything else, so you're not doing a huge commitment. It's a, top of my head, 75,000 word book, so it's not like super long. That's an easy sell for readers. So that's definitely something I recommend. In terms of standing out, I think covers. Your covers need to be to market. So it's really about looking at who is selling in your subgenre, and I know what you write, so in your case, who is selling and what kind of covers do they have. Now, you also need to know what covers fit your type of book. I'm reading, and she's actually sitting there, Jack Caller's book right now, which is absolutely fabulous. She has, her book has the classic rom-com type cover, what do you call that, a cartoon? Illustrated, that's the word I'm looking for, illustrated cover. For me, that's a hard sell, because my books are so high heat and a little more edgy. I wouldn't put an illustrated book on the primary cover. I would do it as a special, but not as a first cover. So also make sure that your cover doesn't just fit the market, but accurately represents the book that you're trying to sell to readers. The bottom line for me is reader expectations. Readers need to know what to expect from your book, and then you need to deliver what you said you were going to. So if you give them a blurb that tells you this is a feel-good cowboy romance set in Wyoming on a ranch and there's nothing bad going to happen, then you damn well better deliver on that promise. Because if she lets a horse die, which she would never do, but readers are absolutely going to be incredibly pissed off. So reader expectations is really, to me, the name of the game. What do readers want? What are you delivering to them? And are you satisfying their expectations? Are you communicating them, and are you satisfying them? I think that's really the most crucial advice I can give. I hope that helped.
It was interesting what you just said about covers. I think for FF it's slightly different. Readers have a really clear view of what they want the covers to look like, and I think with FF there's a lot more playing room with that.
I think you're right, having worked with some FF authors, but also I think part of that comes down to who's reading and what are they looking for. Again, it's that reader expectation. There are a lot more, not only illustrated covers that I've seen in FF, but they're either abstract, they're object-based, things like that. They take on an entirely different meaning and purpose in selling that book than what a lot of the MM romances do.
So,
I want to add one more thing that just popped into my head. Be very careful to look at what the absolute best-selling authors are doing, because they can get away with shit that you can't. I can buck the trend with all due respect, and this is not me bragging because I'm way too Dutch for that. Like 4 generations of my ancestors would like come haunt me if I bragged. I can get away with stuff that others can't, just because I have that loyal fan base, that loyal reader base. I can do a different kind of cover, and the best example is the Ballsy Boys books that Kylie Nohalt and I wrote, which our old covers were completely opposite the trend, and yet they sold really, really well. You can do that if you have the fan base. If you don't have that, if you still want to grow, then they have to be to what the majority is doing.
So following up on Blake's question, and also on what Nora, what you kind of began with, you do a lot of research on what's hot. What are the tropes that are really selling these days? Is it billionaire, secret baby, cowboy, mountain man?
All of the above in one book.
I'd like to see you. I'd like to see you pull off a secret baby in MM. I haven't managed that one yet, and I do write MPreg, so I don't know. I think there's evergreen tropes that always have been and will be popular. Friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, second chance romance. Those will always be popular. The thing is with a trope is you also have to write it the way that readers expect. I always say if you write a trope, you have about 90% or about 10% flexibility, and the other 90% has to be what readers expect. That 10%, you can do something funny, twisty, slightly different, but the 90% has to be what readers expect. There's also trends. Daddy kink has been a definite trend that is absolutely on its way down, unfortunately, because I love it. MPreg is much, much smaller than it used to be. I can see that in my own sales. I still write some of it, but not as much as I used to. It's not as popular as it used to be. That was a trend that was super high that has gone down. I think cowboys are hot, actually.
They've been growing, beg your pardon, they've been growing for a while, slowly, like a cowboy might draw or walk or run. and it's just, I don't know why, but yeah, it's kind of come back from being a very small part to a bigger
Well,
part.
who doesn't like a cowboy? Save a horse, ride a cowboy, right?
Nobody that I know.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Any thing you've noticed about the difference between contemporary and historical?
Oh, contemporary is outselling historic about 10 to 1. And it's not it's not that I want it to be that way. Let me be crystal clear. I have a degree in history. I freaking love historical. Absolutely love them, but they don't sell nearly as well as contemporary. Contemporary rom-com is the biggest genre. It's the biggest subgenre within MM, and everything after that is just the funnel down. So, yeah, I can't write rom-com to save my life, though, so there's that.
Thank you.
It's a true story. The one time I tried to write a rom-com, I paralyzed a character. It becomes very unfunny once you do that. Okay.
That would totally be me.
Yeah, I'm like, you know. Okay, so Nora's telling me it's time to go. So we're going to wrap up, and I think we're probably going to hang out for a few minutes. And if you have any other questions, go
And
ahead and
thanks
ask.
for coming, everybody. It was nice to see such friendly faces and great questions.